A child ignored by everyone cries for help in the middle of the city. No one listens until someone stops and discovers a secret that could change everything. It was late afternoon in Boston's historic district when Michael Davidson, one of the country's most respected and private businessmen, was leaving an artificial intelligence conference. Heading to his penthouse in Beacon Hill, he was barely waiting for the light to change, distracted by messages from his team, when a shrill scream made him turn his head. In the square in front of him, a little girl was crying uncontrollably, clutching the hem of a stranger's shirt and desperately pointing to a park bench where a woman had fainted. "Please help my mom. She fainted and no one wants to help," the girl shouted as the man shook her off, irritated, and continued walking. Other passers-by also averted their gaze, pretending not to hear, as if this child's suffering was part of the urban landscape, ignorable, uncomfortable, invisible. But something in that moment paralyzed Michael. Without understanding why, he turned off his car and approached. The girl was trembling, her hands dirty with dust and tears, repeatedly pointing to the bench with wide eyes. Michael's heart beat faster as he approached the unconscious woman. She was pale, showing signs of extreme fatigue and dehydration. Next to her, an old bag and some scattered papers suggested she had fainted from weakness. Michael immediately called for help, contacted emergency services, and stayed with the girl until the ambulance arrived. During those eternal minutes, the little girl managed between sobs to explain that her mother hadn't been eating properly for days, that she was very worried about some letters arriving at home, and that she had gone out that day to resolve important problems, but ended up falling ill. At the hospital, he discovered that the child's name was Emma Miller, 6 years old, and that the woman was her mother, Sarah Miller, a teacher at a public school. Sarah was unconscious due to severe hypoglycemia, caused by prolonged stress and poor nutrition. She had no identification in her bag, and they hadn't been able to contact any relatives. Michael, observing Emma alone and frightened, felt something he hadn't experienced in years, a genuine impulse to help without expecting anything in return. While talking with Emma, Michael gathered fragments of the family situation. The girl spoke confusingly about her Uncle Robert, her mother's brother, who was trying to take their house away and made her mother cry every night. Emma mentioned strange meetings, men in suits visiting the house, and her mother always being nervous after receiving phone calls. The child also talked about Grandma's house that her uncle wanted to sell, but that her mother said belonged to them too. During Sarah's first days of hospitalization for treatment of malnutrition and severe stress, Emma was taken to a supervised children's ward, but it was with Michael that she felt safe. He visited daily, brought books and toys, and gradually came to better understand the situation. Sarah and Robert were in a family dispute over the inheritance left by their mother, who had passed away a few months earlier. When Sarah finally regained consciousness, she was visibly fragile and confused. Her first words were to ask about Emma, and when she learned that her daughter was being cared for by a stranger who had helped them, she began to cry with relief and gratitude. Sarah explained to Michael that she had been living a family nightmare since her mother's passing. Robert had taken control of all the inheritance papers, claiming she wasn't emotionally equipped to deal with bureaucracy. "He says he's protecting me, but I feel like I'm losing everything," Sarah confessed, her voice breaking. "My mother left the house for the two of us, Emma and me, but Robert insists the will isn't valid, that she was confused when she made it. He wants to sell everything and give me only a small portion of the money." Michael listened attentively as Sarah described how Robert had gotten her to sign some temporary documents claiming they were just to organize the paperwork, but later discovered they were broad powers of attorney, giving him control over all assets. When she tried to question this, Robert began suggesting she was emotionally unstable due to grief, even scheduling psychiatric appointments without her consent. I started to suspect something when Emma told me that her uncle had said we might have to live somewhere else because Mommy was sick in the head. Sarah sighed deeply. That's when I decided to seek legal help, but Robert said I was being paranoid. In the last few days, the pressure was so intense that I could barely eat or sleep. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't helped us. Michael, still not fully understanding why he was getting involved in such a complex situation, offered temporary legal and financial support. There was something in Sarah's quiet determination, and Emma's innocence that touched a part of his soul he believed had been dormant forever. As Sarah recovered, Michael began discreetly investigating the situation. His lawyer, Dr. Frank Simmons, requested copies of all documents involved in the inheritance. What they discovered was surprising. The original will indeed left the family home to Sarah and Emma, but there were several later versions with questionable signatures. During this period, Robert appeared at the hospital. Elegantly dressed and with an air of controlled indignation, he introduced himself as the concerned brother, who had desperately searched for Sarah for days. He claimed she had disappeared from home with Emma, leaving him in panic. He brought medical reports suggesting Sarah had been suffering from emotional instability since her mother's death. "My sister is going through a very difficult time," Robert explained to Michael, with a measured voice and the appearance of someone carrying a great burden. "Grief has affected her deeply, and she has developed some distorted interpretations of reality. I'm just trying to protect her and my niece, taking care of the practical aspects of the inheritance, while Sarah recovers emotionally." Michael carefully observed Robert's behavior. There was something in the way he spoke, too calculated, too rehearsed. His gestures seemed performative, and he avoided making direct eye contact with Sarah when she was present. Emma, meanwhile, became visibly tense when her uncle appeared, hiding behind Michael or the nurses. Robert tried to convince Michael that Sarah needed prolonged psychiatric treatment and that he, as the only responsible adult relative, should temporarily assume custody of Emma and administration of the family assets. He presented documents that seemed legal and convincing, but Michael decided to consult his own lawyer before accepting any explanation. The family tension was palpable. Sarah became extremely agitated whenever Robert visited, claiming he was manipulating her and that he had completely changed after their mother's death. Robert, in turn, interpreted these reactions as symptoms of Sarah's mental instability, creating a cycle of distrust that seemed endless. Michael realized he was being pulled into the center of a complex and painful family dynamic. Part of him wanted to simply step away and return to his orderly, predictable life, but every time he looked at Emma or saw Sarah's genuine vulnerability, he felt he couldn't abandon them. There was something about this situation that awakened a sense of protection he didn't know he possessed. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit like. Tell us what city you're watching from. We'll continue. In the following days, Michael found himself in a position he never imagined occupying. His mornings, previously dedicated exclusively to corporate meetings and financial analyses, now included hospital visits, conversations with social workers, and lengthy investigations into inheritance law. It was as if an invisible force compelled him to unravel this complex family drama. Emma had become his little shadow during visits. The girl, who initially appeared shy and withdrawn, began to open up to Michael in a way that surprised him. She told stories about her life before the confusion with Uncle Robert, describing a cozy house where she played in the yard with her mother and where her grandmother used to make chocolate truffles on Sundays. "Grandma always said the house would be ours forever," Emma confided one afternoon, while drawing with the colored pencils Michael had brought. She said she wrote it on a special paper, so Mom wouldn't worry. But after Grandma went away, Uncle Robert became different. These innocent revelations from Emma began to form a clearer picture for Michael. The grandmother had been very close to Sarah and Emma, especially after Sarah's divorce when Emma was only 2 years old. Robert, according to the child, rarely visited during his mother's life, appearing only sporadically to borrow money. "Mom always helped Uncle Robert when he needed it," continued Emma, focused on her drawing. "Grandma would get angry and say he only showed up when he needed something. After Grandma went away, he came to live with us and said now he would take care of everything." Dr. Frank Simmons, Michael's lawyer, had gained access to preliminary inheritance documents through appropriate legal channels. What he discovered was disturbing. There were, in fact, 3 different versions of Sarah and Robert's mother's will. The first, dated 5 years before her death, left all property to Sarah and Emma. The second, 2 years later, divided the assets equally between Sarah and Robert. The third, signed just 3 weeks before her passing, left Robert as the sole heir and Sarah as the beneficiary of a small sum of money. The signatures on the more recent versions show inconsistencies, Dr. Simmons explained during a meeting in his office. The handwriting appears to have been influenced by tremors, possibly due to the medication the lady was taking in her final months. But most suspicious is that these changes were made when Sarah was traveling for work and wasn't present to discuss the changes. Michael requested a handwriting analysis of the documents. While awaiting the results, Sarah was discharged from the hospital. She was physically recovered, but emotionally still very fragile. Robert had prepared a rented apartment where she and Emma would move temporarily, while the family home was being organized for sale. "I don't want to go to that apartment," Sarah confessed to Michael during a walk through the hospital gardens. "I know that once I leave my mother's house, I'll never be able to return. Robert is pressuring me to sign more papers, claiming they're just formalities, but I've learned to distrust everything he brings." Sarah then revealed something that had been disturbing her for weeks. During the last months of her mother's life, Robert had become extremely attentive and present, something completely out of his usual pattern. He brought medications, accompanied medical appointments, and offered to help with bureaucratic matters. Sarah at the time had been happy with this change in her brother's attitude, interpreting it as late maturity. "Now I realize he was strategically positioning himself," Sarah said bitterly. "He became the reference person for all the doctors and caregivers. When I questioned any decision about my mother's treatment, he always had a convincing medical explanation. I felt guilty for distrusting someone who was being so helpful." Michael was beginning to understand the sophistication of the manipulation involved. Robert wasn't an obvious villain. He was a subtle manipulator who constructed convincing narratives and took advantage of others' emotional vulnerability. He had cultivated the image of a dedicated son with healthcare professionals while isolating Sarah from important decisions about their mother. During one of Robert's visits to the hospital, Michael decided to observe him more carefully. Robert arrived with flowers for Sarah and a gift for Emma, perfectly playing the role of the concerned brother. But Michael noticed small details. How Robert constantly checked his phone during conversation, how his smiles never reached his eyes, and especially how Emma reacted to his presence. "Uncle Robert, the lady from the office said you sold Grandma's truffles," Emma said innocently during the visit. Robert hesitated for a fraction of a second before responding, "No, my dear. I just put them in a safe place. When you and Mommy are better, I'll return everything." But Michael had noticed the hesitation and later asked Emma about these truffles. The girl explained that her grandmother owned a collection of antique silver truffles, a family heirloom displayed on the living room shelf. Sarah confirmed that these pieces had disappeared from the house during her hospitalization, and Robert claimed to have stored them for safety. Rachel, Michael's efficient secretary, had been instructed to make some discreet checks on Robert. What she discovered added more pieces to the puzzle. Robert had recently changed his lifestyle, acquiring a new car and moving to a more luxurious apartment. Additionally, he had consulted 3 different law firms specializing in inheritances in the last 6 months. "It's interesting to note that he consulted each firm with slightly different versions of the same story," reported Rachel. In one version, Sarah was portrayed as emotionally unstable, in another as chemically dependent, in the third as financially incompetent. It seems he was testing different legal strategies. This information reminded Sarah of something important. In recent months, Robert had insisted she take natural anxiety medications, which he himself purchased from compounding pharmacies. Sarah had agreed, thinking her brother was genuinely concerned about her well-being. But now she questioned whether these medications could have affected her judgment during document signings. "He always said the medicines would help me better deal with the stress of our mother's illness," Sarah recalled. "And indeed I felt somewhat disconnected during that period, as if I was watching everything from a distance, unable to react properly." Michael suggested Sarah get tests to check if there were still residues of these substances in her system. The results showed traces of sedatives in significant doses, not dangerous but certainly enough to diminish her ability to concentrate and discern. Meanwhile, Robert's pressure increased. He had scheduled a meeting at the notary's office for Sarah to sign the final property transfer papers. He claimed there were interested buyers and that the money from the sale would be fairly divided between them. with Sarah receiving enough to restart her life with peace of mind. "He makes it seem like he's being generous," Sarah told Michael on the eve of the meeting. "But I grew up in that house. Emma took her first steps in that yard. My mother planted every tree in the garden. It's not just property. It's our family history. And I'm sure my mother wanted Emma to grow up there just as I did." Michael realized this wasn't just a financial dispute, but a battle to preserve memories and emotional bonds. Sarah wasn't just fighting for money, but for the right to keep alive the emotional legacy her mother had left behind. The night before the notary meeting, Emma made a revelation that would completely change the course of investigations. Playing with her favorite teddy bear, Nino, she casually mentioned that her grandmother had hidden a special present inside the toy before passing away. Emma's revelation about the special present, hidden in the Nino teddy bear, created a wave of expectation among the adults. Sarah, who until then had seemed resigned to her situation, suddenly showed an energy she hadn't displayed for weeks. Michael, meanwhile, felt they might finally be close to finding concrete evidence to unmask Robert's manipulations. "Grandma said it was our secret," explained Emma, hugging the teddy bear affectionately. "She opened Nino's tummy and put something inside. She said that one day when I was grown up, it would be very important." With extreme care, Sarah examined the teddy bear. On the back, almost imperceptible, was a small opening that had been hand-sewn with slightly different colored thread. With trembling fingers, she carefully undid the stitching. Inside the cotton stuffing, she found a small sealed envelope with "For Sarah and Emma, with all my love," written in her mother's unmistakable handwriting. The envelope contained 3 items that left everyone in silence. The first was a handwritten 2-page letter, dated just 1 week before the grandmother's death. The second was an authenticated copy of the original will, the one that left all the property to Sarah and Emma. The third item was unexpected, a miniature digital recorder, the type used for quick notes. Sarah read the letter aloud, her voice choked with emotion. "My dear Sarah and my precious Emma, if you are reading this letter, it's because something has happened to me and circumstances have forced you to look for answers. In recent months, I've noticed changes in Robert's behavior that have worried me greatly. He has been asking questions about my will, suggesting changes that don't make sense, and I've noticed some of my important documents have been tampered with." The letter continued, revealing that the grandmother had begun to suspect Robert's true intentions when he insisted she change her will, citing tax issues she knew were false. Suspicious, she had sought out her private attorney, Dr. Henry Crawford, to confirm the validity of the original document and create this time capsule as evidence. "I pretended to agree with some of Robert's suggestions to avoid conflicts, but I never signed anything definitive. All documents that leave Robert as the sole heir are forgeries or were signed under duress. Sarah, my daughter, trust your instincts. The house is yours and Emma's. It's there that you should build your happiness." Michael watched Sarah cry silently as she finished reading. It was a cry of relief mixed with pain, relief for having evidence of the truth, pain for realizing how deep the manipulation had been. The digital recorder contained several personal notes from the grandmother, but 3 specific recordings were particularly relevant. In the first, dated 2 months before her passing, the grandmother's frail but lucid voice described a conversation where Robert had tried to convince her that Sarah was facing serious financial problems and that it would be better to leave the inheritance for him to manage. "Robert brought me some papers today, saying Sarah has debts I don't know about," said the recording. "But I talked to Sarah yesterday, and she didn't mention anything like that. Something isn't right. Robert never cared about my affairs before. Why is he so concerned about my inheritance now?" The second recording was even more revealing. The grandmother had discreetly recorded a conversation with Robert where he pressured her to sign new documents, claiming fiscal urgency. In the recording, Robert could be heard using emotional manipulation techniques, reminding his mother of all the times Sarah had disappointed the family and suggesting Emma would be better cared for if he assumed financial responsibility. The third recording was the most touching. It was a direct message to Sarah and Emma, apparently recorded in the early morning hours. "Sarah, my daughter, if you're hearing this, it's because my suspicions were confirmed. Robert is not the son I thought I knew. has changed, or perhaps I never truly knew him. Don't let him take from you what is rightfully yours. The house isn't just property. It's the place where your grandmother and I raised you with so much love. It's where Emma should grow up, surrounded by the same happy memories you had. Dr. Frank Simmons was immediately contacted to analyze these new elements. He explained that the recordings being made by the person in question about her perceptions and experiences could be considered evidence of the grandmother's mental capacity and her true intentions. Moreover, the existence of an authenticated copy of the original will, secretly preserved, strongly suggested that later versions were fraudulent. This completely changes the legal landscape of the situation, explained Dr. Simmons. We have evidence that the lady was mentally capable, suspected manipulation, and had taken measures to preserve her true wishes. Now we need to contact Dr. Henry Crawford to confirm the details. Meanwhile, Robert continued pressuring for the notary meeting. He had sent several messages to Sarah, alternating between concerned and slightly threatening tones. In one message, he wrote, "Sarah, you're being influenced by people who don't know our family. This businessman is just taking advantage of your vulnerability. Our mother wouldn't want to see the family destroyed because of misunderstandings." Michael realized that Robert was trying to isolate him from the situation, probably fearing that his influence could strengthen Sarah's resistance. But what Robert didn't know was that Michael had become genuinely invested in the search for truth. It was no longer just a question of helping strangers in difficulty. He had developed a deep affection for Emma and sincere admiration for Sarah's strength. Dr. Henry Crawford, when finally contacted, confirmed all suspicions. He revealed that the grandmother had visited his office several times in the last months of her life, always discreetly accompanied and always asking about the validity of her original will. She had expressed concerns about family pressures and requested an authenticated second copy, which was delivered to her personally 2 weeks before her passing. Elizabeth Miller was perfectly lucid and very concerned, Dr. Crawford testified. She mentioned that Robert was trying to convince her to make changes that didn't reflect her true wishes. She loved both her children, but felt that Sarah had been the true caregiver and that Emma deserved to grow up in the family home. Sarah felt as if an enormous weight had been lifted from her shoulders. She finally had concrete proof that her mother hadn't changed her mind about the inheritance, and that all her suspicions about Robert were well-founded. Emma, who had witnessed the entire discovery, hugged her mother tightly. "Mommy, Grandma really wanted us to stay in her house, right?" "Yes, my love. Grandma wanted you to play in the same yard where I played when I was a child." Michael observed that moment of reconnection between mother and daughter with an emotion that surprised him. He had begun that journey as a reluctant observer, but now felt an integral part of Sarah and Emma's fight for justice. For the first time in years, he was involved in something that transcended financial or professional matters. He was fighting for what was right. But Robert wouldn't give up easily. When he learned that Sarah had cancelled the notary meeting, he appeared at the hospital with a completely different demeanor. No longer the solicitous and concerned brother, but someone visibly irritated and determined to maintain control of the situation. "Sarah, you're making a serious mistake," he said, without even greeting Michael or showing affection for Emma. "This man is filling your head with illusions. Our mother changed her mind about the will for good reasons. You're not in a position to manage a property of that value." The change in Robert's personality was so evident that even Emma recoiled, hiding behind Michael. Sarah, strengthened by the evidence she had found, confronted her brother with a firmness she hadn't shown in months. "Robert, I found Mom's letter and the recordings. I know the truth now. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit like. Tell us what city you're watching from. We'll continue." The silence that followed Sarah's revelation was deafening. Robert stood motionless for a few seconds, as if processing what he had just heard. When he finally reacted, his transformation was so dramatic that Michael understood he was seeing, for the first time, the true personality behind the carefully constructed mask. Recordings. "What recordings?" Robert tried to maintain a tone of incredulity, but there was a new tension in his voice. "Sarah, you're imagining things. Our mother was very debilitated in her final months. Anything she might have said or done during that period can't be taken seriously. Sarah, firmly holding the envelope containing the evidence, looked directly into her brother's eyes. "Robert, she recorded you pressuring her to change the will. Your voice is registered saying terrible things about me to convince her." Robert's face changed completely. The expression of fraternal concern disappeared, replaced by something much colder and more calculating. "You don't understand the position I put myself in, Sarah. I spent a fortune caring for our mother in recent years. I paid for private doctors, expensive medications, specialized nurses. While you were busy with your little teacher's life, I was taking on all the responsibilities. You never told me you were spending money on Mom's treatment," Sarah replied, her voice growing in intensity. "I offered financial help several times, and you always said everything was under control." "Because I knew you weren't in a position to contribute significantly," Robert responded with disdain. "Your teacher's salary barely supports you and Emma adequately. I assumed those costs because I'm the male child, because I have real financial capacity." Michael watched the discussion with growing indignation. Robert had revealed a deeply sexist and elitist mentality, as if Sarah had no right to participate in decisions simply because she earned less money or because she was a woman. Emma, frightened by the raised tone of the conversation, began to cry softly. Sarah immediately crouched down to console her, but Robert continued his verbal assault. "Besides, Sarah, you need to be honest about your mental situation. Since the divorce, you've shown emotional instability. Our mother was concerned about this. She confided in me several times that she feared you wouldn't be able to raise Emma properly." "That's a lie," Sarah exclaimed, rising abruptly. "Mom adored Emma, loved spending time with us. She never questioned my ability as a mother. She was being polite, Sarah, but with me in private she expressed her true concerns." Michael could no longer remain silent. "Robert, the recordings Sarah found completely contradict your version of events. Your own mother expressed distrust about your intentions." Robert turned to Michael with evident hostility. "You shouldn't be meddling in our family affairs. I don't know what your true intentions are with my sister, but I can assure you they're not altruistic. My intentions are to help a family that has been deceived and manipulated," Michael responded calmly but firmly. "And the evidence is clear about who's lying here." Robert changed strategy, trying to regain some control of the situation. "Sarah, even if these recordings exist, you need to understand that our mother was confused in her final months. The medications affected her perception of reality. Any competent lawyer would contest this evidence. Dr. Henry Crawford has already confirmed that Mom was perfectly lucid when she sought his office," Sarah countered. "She took deliberate measures to protect the truth." The mention of the lawyer made Robert hesitate again. Evidently, he hadn't expected Sarah to contact Dr. Crawford so quickly. Michael noticed that Robert was recalculating his strategy, looking for a new approach. "Very well," Robert said, completely changing his tone. "Let's say you manage to prove the original will is valid. Do you really believe you can maintain that property? The annual taxes, maintenance, security costs. Sarah, you'll end up losing everything because you can't manage it properly." "That's none of your business," Sarah responded. "If I decide to sell the house in the future, it will be my decision, not yours." "And Emma? Have you thought about her future? If you get the inheritance and can't manage it well, what will be left for her education, for her future?" It was a subtle manipulation, but Michael immediately recognized the tactic. Robert was trying to make Sarah feel guilty for harming her own daughter's future. Emma, who had stopped crying, surprised everyone by speaking. "Uncle Robert, why do you want Grandma's house so badly?" "You didn't even like to play there when I was little." The child's innocent question exposed something the adults had lost sight of. Robert had never demonstrated emotional attachment to that property. His motivation was purely financial. "Emma, you're too young to understand these matters," Robert replied, clearly irritated at having to explain himself to a child. "But Grandma told me the house was special because it had many happy memories," Emma continued. "She said I would grow up there like Mommy did. Why do you want to take away the memories from me and Mommy?" Robert couldn't answer Emma's question without revealing even more of his true motivations. Michael realized that the child, with her simple and direct logic, had exposed the fundamental selfishness motivating Robert. At that moment, Dr. Frank Simmons arrived with important news. He had secured a preliminary court order suspending any transaction involving the property until all evidence was properly analyzed. Additionally, a handwriting expert had confirmed that the signatures on the more recent wills showed characteristics of forgery. "Robert Miller," Dr. Simmons formally addressed the man, "you are hereby notified that any attempt to sell or transfer the property in question will be considered fraudulent. I recommend you seek appropriate legal representation." The lawyer's arrival and the legal formalization of the situation completely changed the dynamics of the confrontation. Robert realized that his family manipulation strategy had been definitively interrupted by legal processes he could no longer control simply with charm and smooth talk. "This won't end here," Robert said, addressing primarily Michael. "You may have convinced my sister that you're her savior, but I'll prove you have ulterior motives in this situation. My only interests are seeing justice done and a family being protected from manipulation," Michael responded. "If that bothers you, perhaps you should ask yourself why." After Robert left, Sarah collapsed into a chair, emotionally and physically exhausted. "Michael, I don't know how to thank you for everything you've done for us. Without your help, I would have signed those papers and lost everything." "You don't need to thank me, Sarah. You had the courage to question the situation when you realized something was wrong. I just offered the support you needed." Emma approached Michael and, without warning, hugged him. "Michael, will you still be our friend after we go back to Grandma's house?" The child's question touched Michael deeply. He realized that, at some point during those intense days, Sarah and Emma had become much more than people he was helping. They had become part of his life in a way he hadn't experienced in years. "Of course, Emma, you've become very important to me." Sarah looked at Michael with an expression that mixed gratitude, affection, and something deeper that neither was ready to name yet. "Michael, you changed our lives, but I have the impression that this experience has also changed something in you." Michael smiled, recognizing the truth in those words. "Yes, it has. I've learned that sometimes the most important things in life happen when we decide to stop and listen to those who need help." But even with all the evidence in Sarah's favor, Michael knew that Robert wouldn't give up easily. Men like him didn't accept defeat without fighting with all available weapons. The legal battle was just beginning. In the weeks following the confrontation at the hospital, Sarah and Emma's life began to assume a new normalcy. They had moved to a temporary apartment that Michael had arranged, away from Robert's pressures and manipulations, while awaiting the legal resolution that would allow them to return to the family home. Emma was attending a new nearby school, where she quickly made friends, and Sarah had secured a temporary position at a renowned private school, where her pedagogical skills were immediately recognized. Michael visited regularly, and his presence had become a comforting constant in both their lives. He helped Emma with homework, took Sarah to dinner when she seemed especially tired, and gradually became a caring father figure for the girl and an increasingly close companion for Sarah. During these moments of relative tranquility, Sarah and Michael talked at length about their lives, their dreams and their transformations. Sarah discovered that Michael had built a professionally successful but emotionally empty life, focusing exclusively on material achievements after a previous relationship that had ended painfully years before. "I had given up believing that genuinely good people existed in this world," Michael confessed one night as they watched Emma drawing at the kitchen table. "You and Emma showed me I was wrong. There is goodness, there is true love, there is courage to do what's right." Sarah smiled, gently touching Michael's hand. "You saved our lives, Michael, and not just financially or legally. You gave us back hope when I thought I had lost everything." The growing intimacy between them didn't go unnoticed by Emma, who began making innocent comments about how nice it would be if Michael stayed forever with them. Sarah blushed at these observations, but Michael responded with affection, saying he was happy to be part of their family, regardless of the form it took. However, the peace they had found was about to be tested again. Robert, as Michael had predicted, hadn't accepted his defeat and was preparing an elaborate counteroffensive. Dr. Frank Simmons received a court summons that left everyone surprised and concerned. Robert had hired a prestigious law firm, specializing in complex inheritance cases, and was questioning not only the validity of the evidence found by Sarah but also Michael's motivations for getting involved in the situation. They're alleging that you, Michael, may have a financial interest in the property, explained Dr. Simmons during an urgent meeting in his office. Robert is suggesting that you approached Sarah with romantic intentions to eventually gain access to the inheritance. The accusation was as absurd as it was offensive, but Michael immediately understood the strategy behind it. Robert was trying to transform the narrative, painting Michael as a financial predator, taking advantage of Sarah's vulnerability. Do they have any evidence to support this accusation? Sarah asked, visibly indignant. Concrete evidence, no, Dr. Simmons replied, but they're presenting a timeline of your relationship, documenting all the expenses Michael has assumed for you, and suggesting that this extraordinary generosity cannot be explained by altruism alone. Sarah was furious. How dare they question Michael's integrity? He helped us when no one else cared. We didn't ask for anything. He offered help spontaneously. Unfortunately, Sarah, in the legal world, extraordinary acts of kindness are sometimes interpreted with cynicism, Dr. Simmons explained, especially when they involve significant sums of money and valuable properties. Michael was quiet, processing the implications of the accusation. He knew his motivation for helping Sarah and Emma had been genuine from the first moment, but he also understood how, to outside observers, his involvement could seem suspicious. Dr. Simmons, what kind of evidence would be necessary to refute these allegations? Michael finally asked. Honestly, the best defense would be to demonstrate that you have no financial need for the inheritance and that your motivation for helping was purely humanitarian. Your financial records, your professional reputation, and character testimonies would be important. Sarah rose abruptly. This is ridiculous. Michael is a successful businessman. He doesn't need our property. And even if he did, he would be entitled to it after everything he's done for us. Sarah's last sentence surprised even herself. There was an emotional implication in those words that revealed feelings she hadn't yet fully admitted, even to herself. Michael looked at Sarah with a tender expression. Sarah, I want you to know that regardless of what happens with these accusations, my motivation was never the property or any financial benefit. It was you and Emma. It was the feelings you awakened in me. At that moment, Emma entered the room carrying her Nino teddy bear. Why is everyone sad? Is Uncle Robert being mean again? The simplicity of Emma's question cut through the tension of the moment. Sarah crouched down to her daughter's height. No, my love. We're just solving some adult problems. Nothing you need to worry about. But Emma, with the keen perception of children, captured more than the adults imagined. Michael, you're not going away, are you? Uncle Robert told Aunt Martha that you were just pretending to be our friend. Emma's revelation introduced a worrying new element. Martha was a neighbor from the family home who had always been close to Robert. If he was spreading rumors in the neighborhood, it meant he was trying to undermine Michael and Sarah's reputation in their own community. Dr. Simmons made some notes. This could be considered defamation. If Robert is spreading false information that damages your reputation, we can consider additional legal action. Michael, however, was more concerned about the emotional impact these machinations were having on Emma. The girl had been through enough trauma and didn't deserve to be exposed to adult manipulations. Sarah, perhaps it would be better if I temporarily distanced myself until this legal situation is resolved, Michael suggested with evident reluctance. I don't want my presence to be used against you. No, Emma exclaimed, hugging Michael tightly. You can't go away. You're our family now. Sarah felt her heart break seeing her daughter's anguish. Michael, your distancing yourself now would be like giving credence to Robert's accusations. It would make it seem like you really had ulterior motives. Dr. Simmons agreed. Sarah is right. A sudden withdrawal could be interpreted as an implicit admission of guilt. That night, after Emma had gone to bed, Sarah and Michael had the most honest conversation they had shared until then. Sitting on the small sofa in the temporary apartment, they finally addressed the feelings that had been growing between them. Michael, I need you to know that even if Robert manages to complicate our legal situation, it doesn't change what I feel for you, Sarah said, with courage she didn't know she possessed. You entered our lives as a guardian angel, but over these weeks you've become much more than that. Michael took Sarah's hands in his. Sarah, I was living an empty life before meeting you. Professional success, material comfort, but no real connection to anything that truly mattered. You and Emma showed me what it really means to have a family, to have a purpose that goes beyond money. So no matter what Robert tries to do, we'll face it together. Together, Michael confirmed, sealing the promise with a tender kiss that symbolized not only the love that was blossoming between them, but also a commitment to remain united against any adversity. However, Robert had prepared another surprise. The next morning, Sarah received an unexpected call from Emma's school. The principal informed her that a man had appeared claiming to be the girl's uncle and asking for information about her welfare, expressing concerns about her family situation. The school, following security protocols, had denied any information and contacted Sarah immediately. But the incident made it clear that Robert was escalating his tactics, now trying to involve the school and potentially other aspects of Emma's life. He's trying to build a case that Emma is at risk with us, Sarah realized, with growing alarm. If he can convince the authorities that we're inadequate as guardians, he might try to get custody of her. The possibility of losing Emma to Robert was the most terrible nightmare Sarah could imagine. It was a threat that went far beyond the inheritance issue. It was a direct attack on the core of her family. The threat to Emma's custody mobilized all the resources that Michael and Dr. Simmons could gather. They knew Robert had crossed a dangerous line, and that it was necessary to act quickly to protect the girl and her mother. What they didn't expect was that Robert's own escalation would end up being his downfall. Dr. Henry Crawford, the lawyer who had helped Emma's grandmother protect her true intentions, brought a surprising revelation during an emergency meeting. He had kept more evidence than initially revealed, including a video recording that the grandmother had made in his office 2 weeks before her passing. Elizabeth Miller was extremely concerned about Sarah and Emma's future, explained Dr. Crawford, setting up the video equipment. She asked me to record a formal statement about her mental capacity and her true intentions, in case someone tried to question them later. In the video, the grandmother appeared clearly lucid and determined. Her voice, though frail due to age, was firm as she explained her decisions. My name is Elizabeth Miller, and I am recording this statement in Dr. Henry Crawford's office, in full possession of my mental faculties. I want to register that my decision to leave the family property to my daughter Sarah and my granddaughter Emma is definitive and irrevocable. Any subsequent document that contradicts this wish should be considered fraudulent. The grandmother continued, revealing details that surprised even Sarah. My son Robert has been trying to convince me to change my will, claiming that Sarah doesn't have the capacity to manage the inheritance. This is false. Sarah is a dedicated mother, a competent professional, and the only person who really took care of me during my illness. Robert only appeared in the last few months, when he realized my condition was deteriorating. But the most shocking revelation came next. I discovered that Robert has significant debts related to unsuccessful investments. He needs the money from the property sale to pay off these debts. This is not a dispute about family love or Sarah's capacity. It's about Robert's desperate financial need. Dr. Simmons paused the video to process the implications. If we can prove Robert's debts, this would completely explain his motivations and discredit all his allegations about your welfare. Rachel, Michael's secretary, had continued her discreet investigations into Robert. What she discovered confirmed the grandmother's suspicions. Robert had invested heavily in a real estate venture that had failed, leaving him with debts that seriously compromised his financial situation. Additionally, he had used his mother's house as collateral for loans without her knowledge. That's why he was so desperate to get the property, Sarah realized. It wasn't simple greed, it was financial survival. Michael felt a mixture of relief and pity. Relief because they finally understood Robert's true motivations, and pity because they realized he had become desperate enough to manipulate his own family. The final judgment of the inheritance dispute was scheduled for the following week. Dr. Simmons was confident they had sufficient evidence to ensure Sarah's victory, but Robert had hired specialized lawyers who promised to reveal the truth about the situation. On the morning of the trial, a surprise awaited everyone in court. Emma, who should have stayed at school, appeared accompanied by a social worker. Robert had secured a temporary order claiming the child was being put at risk by the instability of the family situation. Sarah was desperate. "They can't take Emma from me. I'm a good mother." "This is a pressure tactic," Dr. Simmons quickly explained. "Robert is trying to force you to accept an unfavorable agreement in exchange for Emma's immediate return." But Emma, now 7 years old and having developed a surprising understanding of the situation, asked to speak to the judge. Her simple and honest speech was more persuasive than any legal argument. "Your Honor, my mommy takes very good care of me. Michael also takes care of us. We are happy together. Uncle Robert only showed up after Grandma went away, and he always makes Mommy cry. Grandma said the house was ours, and I believe Grandma." The judge, visibly touched by the child's sincerity, requested that all evidence be presented systematically. The grandmother's video testimony had a profound impact in the courtroom. When the audio recordings were played, showing Robert pressuring a fragile elderly woman, several spectators showed visible indignation. Dr. Simmons then presented evidence about Robert's financial situation, including documents proving he had used his mother's property as collateral for loans without her knowledge. This not only explained his motivations, but also demonstrated a pattern of financial dishonesty. Robert's lawyer tried one last strategy, questioning Michael's motivations and suggesting he had manipulated Sarah and Emma for his own benefit. But when Michael was called to testify, his sincerity was evident to everyone in the room. "Your Honor, I met Sarah and Emma by chance in a moment of need. My decision to help them was spontaneous and based solely on the desire to do what was right. During this process, I developed genuine feelings for them, but that happened after my decision to help, not before." Sarah was called to testify next, and her transformation since the beginning of the saga was evident. The fragile woman who had fainted in the square had become a strong and determined person, capable of defending her family with courage and dignity. "Your Honor, I almost lost everything by blindly trusting my brother, but thanks to my mother's foresight and the kindness of people like Michael and Dr. Simmons, I discovered that sometimes it's necessary to fight for what is rightfully ours." When Robert was called to testify, his defense quickly crumbled. Confronted with irrefutable evidence about his debts, his manipulations, and especially with the video of his own mother questioning his motivations, he couldn't maintain the facade of a concerned son. I just wanted to protect the family," he stammered. "Sarah doesn't understand business asset management, but she understands," the judge interrupted, "that using your mother's property as collateral for loans without her knowledge constitutes a serious breach of trust." Robert couldn't answer adequately. His contradictions and hesitations only confirmed what everyone had already realized. He had manipulated a situation of family vulnerability to solve his own financial problems. The judge's decision was categorical. The original will was considered valid. All subsequent alterations were declared fraudulent, and Sarah was confirmed as the legitimate heir to the property. Additionally, Robert was ordered to reimburse all legal and medical costs he had claimed to have paid for their mother, since it was proven that many of these expenses had been financed by Sarah herself without her knowledge. Emma was immediately returned to Sarah's care, and the order of concern about her welfare was revoked. The social worker who had accompanied the case reported that the girl demonstrated a healthy and loving relationship with her mother and was clearly happy and well cared for. 3 months later, Sarah, Emma, and Michael were back in the family home, transforming it not just into a home, but into a symbol of their union and resilience. Michael had made the decision to move to Boston permanently, establishing a regional office of his company in the city and fully integrating into the family's life. The house, which had been the center of the dispute, became the setting for a new phase of their lives. Sarah resumed her work as a teacher, now with renewed confidence. Emma played again in the yard where her mother had grown up, creating happy memories that honored her grandmother's wishes. Robert, forced to confront the consequences of his actions, eventually sought out Sarah to apologize. The process had been a painful awakening for him, revealing how he had allowed financial desperation to corrupt his family values. Sarah, demonstrating a generosity that Michael deeply admired, gestured toward the possibility of reconciliation, provided Robert sought help for his problems and demonstrated genuine change. One evening, as they watched Emma playing in the garden her grandmother had cultivated with such care. Sarah and Michael reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought them there. "You know," said Sarah, nestling into Michael's arm, "my mother always said things happen for a reason. Maybe all this suffering was necessary for us to find each other." Michael gently kissed the top of Sarah's head. "Your mother was a wise woman, and Emma will be raised with that same wisdom and strength." Emma ran up to them, carrying a flower she had picked from the garden. "Look, Grandma left beautiful flowers for us." Michael picked Emma up with Sarah